Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this. Today, we are exploring a truly fascinating intersection. We're looking at how cutting edge artificial intelligence is actually being integrated into deep, soul level pastoral and clinical care. Specifically, we're going to unpack the internal training guidelines from Restoring Hope Ministries, or RHM, and see how they deploy an AI tool called Blueprint across three very distinct clinical disciplines. We're going to see exactly how this technology is tailored for different providers, what we'll call the three hats approach, all while keeping absolutely strict ethical and scope of practice boundaries in place. So here is our mental map for this explainer. We'll start with a baseline, figuring out what Blueprint actually is. Then, we'll put on the biblical counselor hat, followed by the licensed social worker hat, and finally, the neurofeedback clinician hat. We'll wrap it all up with the universal tech guardrails that keep everything secure. Let's get to it.
Section 1. The baseline. What exactly is Blueprint?
Now, before we try on our different hats, you need to understand the absolute baseline rule at RHM. AI is a tool, not a replacement for human discernment, right? It doesn't replace you. So what is Blueprint in this specific context? Well, it's a measurement-based AI and screening tool. Approved staff use it to monitor symptoms over time and to generate draft documentation, like session summaries. The operative word here is aid. It helps providers understand a person's distress, sure, but it never ever forms a spiritual judgment or makes a final clinical diagnosis. So, the crucial point is this. Blueprint is never the final word, ever. The AI output is strictly draft support. A human being, a real person, must review it, correct any factual inaccuracies, contextualize it for the specific type of care being provided, and officially approve it before it becomes part of a client's official record. Basically, AI might start the note, but a human finishes it. Let's break down how these screeners are used practically, because the boundaries are absolutely crucial. For intake triage, the AI clarifies distress levels, but providers cannot promise clinical outcomes based on a screener, obviously. For ongoing care, it tracks changes over time, but providers are sternly warned never to reduce a person to just a set of scores. They are a whole person, not just data. And most importantly, when we're talking about risk signals, like self-harm indicators or abuse concerns flagged by the AI, the boundary is rock solid. Do not manage imminent safety concerns alone, period. AI risk signals demand immediate human consultation and escalation. Moving on to Section 2. The biblical counselor hat, focusing on pastoral scope. So biblical counselors do not hold clinical licenses. Because of that, they do not diagnose and they don't provide regulated psychotherapy. But Blueprint is a clinical AI, right? So naturally, it's going to spit out clinical jargon. Therefore, biblical counselors have a very specific job. They're required to carefully review and actively edit Blueprint's AI-generated drafts. They literally have to act as translators. They translate the clinical output into RHM scope-safe pastoral language. This ensures the documentation accurately reflects their actual practice and completely avoids legally misrepresenting their services. And this brilliantly illustrates that translation in action. Say Blueprint drafts a note stating the psychotherapist created a treatment plan based on a diagnosis. The biblical counselor has to jump in and actively change those words. You see the shift to scope-safe language. Psychotherapist becomes pastoral counselor. Treatment plan becomes care plan. And instead of clinical interventions, it's spiritual formation homework. This isn't just semantics, guys. It's a massive legal and ethical safeguard, ensuring that the documentation matches the soul care that was actually provided. All right, Section 3. Let's switch hats to the licensed social worker and look at the clinical scope. Now, because of their licensure, social workers at RHM take on a much heavier clinical load. They actually use Blueprint data to formally formulate clinical diagnoses and build fully regulated treatment plans. Crucially, they serve as the safety net, the escalation point. Remember those risk signals we just talked about? Well, when a Blueprint screener flags severe trauma or safety concerns during a biblical counselor session, the licensed social worker is the one who steps in. They take over to manage those imminent safety concerns and coordinate any higher-level care that's needed. Now, you might be wondering, we've seen how AI helps with talk therapy and documentation, but what happens when talk therapy just isn't enough? How in the world does AI fit into subcortical trauma healing? The kind of deep healing that happens way beneath the level of conscious thought. That brings us to our final and honestly perhaps the most fascinating clinical role. Section 4. The neurofeedback clinician hat, bridging the brain and the body.
To really grasp this, we have to understand something called the orienting reflex, or OR. Think of it as an automatic, neurological, what was that response. It's what draws the brain toward unexpected stimuli. Now, in trauma survivors, this reflex is often completely dysregulated. It's constantly firing, keeping them in an exhausting state of hypervigilance. So, neurofeedback clinicians at RHM use real-time brainwave training to help habituate this reflex. They are essentially teaching the nervous system how to feel safe again from the ground up.
Now, what's really interesting about this data is exactly how Blueprint AI connects to all this intense neurological work. Clinicians use very specific Blueprint screeners to track measurable symptom decay week over week. For instance, the PCL5 tracks drops in trauma and hyperarousal. The PHQ-9 measures reductions in those heavy depressive freeze states. And the GAD-7 measures baseline anxiety. Blueprint is handing them the raw, measurable data to literally prove that the brain is successfully learning to self-regulate. It's incredible. Finally, Section 5, the universal tech guardrails that keep all this data locked down. No matter which hat you're wearing, RHM operates on a strict double lock standard. Lock number 1 is account access. Think multi-factor authentication and strict permissions. Lock number 2 is device and content control, utilizing encrypted staging folders. The rule is simple. Client info belongs securely inside the official Theranos system. It does not belong scattered across personal desktops or sitting in unmanaged Microsoft 365 folders. Let's move to and see how this builds into their mandatory IT workflow. It's a strict 5-step process. Step 1, you generate and review the AI draft. Step 2, export it to a highly secure staging folder. Step 3, immediately upload that draft to the official Theranos record. Step 4, summarize it in your SOAP note. And step 5, listen, this is the most critical step of the whole shebang. Permanently delete and purge the temporary file from your machine. RHM's training guide actually drives this point home with a very stark, unforgettable conviction. The safest duplicate file is the one that no longer exists. Once a Blueprint PDF or AI draft is safely verified and tucked away inside the Theranos client record, that temporary download on your local computer must be sent straight to the digital shredder. You literally never leave sensitive client data just sitting around in a downloads folder. And that brings us to the core philosophy driving this entire explainer. Across all 3 hats, whether we're talking pastoral care, social work, or neurofeedback, the ultimate takeaway is this. AI screens the symptoms, but humans care for the soul. Blueprint is a phenomenal tool to measure data, to draft initial notes, and to flag critical risks. But the ultimate restorative care, that relies entirely on human empathy, professional oversight, and deep spiritual wisdom. So as we integrate more and more AI into our care environments, the big question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we ensure our technology always serves rather than replaces our humanity? Thanks for diving into this with me today, and keep learning.